listening to The Trident, a podcast on irregular warfare and related issues in the international security environment. The Trident is sponsored by the U.S. Naval War College's Center on Irregular Warfare and Armed Groups. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, retired Army Colonel Dave Brown, and Director of the Center on Irregular Warfare here at the college. Welcome to this special episode of The Trident in conjunction with our recent 2024 Maritime Symposium exploring our maritime strategies held on 24 and 25 June. Today we're discussing the Houthi attacks on global shipping vessels and U.S. warships in the el-Mandeb Strait. We're talking today to Captain Joe Baggett, United States Navy. He's a former senior staff officer that has also served on a number of U.S. naval vessels, including the USS Claggering, the USS Stout, the USS Barry, USS Anzio. He was also commanding officer of the destroyer, the Truxtun, and the Ticonderoga guided missile class USS cruiser, USS Monterey. And he's had short duties, including service on the staff of the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command U.S. Fifth Fleet as lead exercise planner, and he was the operations officer for the Deployable Training Division on the Joint Staff of the J-7. Most recently, he served as Chief of Staff and also ran the Military Operations Center for Fifth Fleet NAVCENT. And he currently serves as the commanding officer of the U.S. Naval Surface Warfare School. And Joe, we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Nadwa Al-Dawsari, I may have gotten that right, I hope, a veteran researcher, conflict analyst, and policy advisor who has 20 years of experience in Yemen and the Middle East. She's a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute and a fellow at the Center on Armed Groups. She advises policymakers, donors, humanitarian organizations, and her insights are widely published by top think tanks in the United States and Europe. In her previous roles, Nadwa served as a senior conflict advisor to the World Food Program, a Yemen country director at the Center for Civilians in Conflict. She was a founding director at Partners Yemen, a MENA advisor at Partners Global, and a senior program manager at the National Democratic Institute. Nadwa's research focuses on Yemeni and regional conflict dynamics, including the impact on U.S. foreign policy, internationally led peace efforts, counterterrorism, and aid on regional security. Thank you. And we're also joined by Mr. Evan Curt. And Evan is the Deputy Commissioner of Maritime Affairs, the Republic of the Marshall Islands. In 2012, Mr. Curt joined International Registries Incorporated Maritime Services Group as the Maritime Security and Investigations Coordinator and was later promoted to Ship Security Manager. In 2021, Mr. Curt was promoted to Vice President, Maritime Security, and deals with ISPS code and related maritime security issues and other initiatives including piracy, armed robbery against ships, maritime terrorism, stowaways, contraband smuggling, and maritime cyber risk management. He serves as a delegate to many maritime security working groups coordinated and supported by the shipping industry associations, also NATO, Coalition Naval Forces, and the International Maritime Organization. Evan, welcome. So today's episode we've entitled The el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea. And maybe we could start for our audience this morning by exploring who exactly the Houthis are and what it is that they want.
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's an honor. The Houthis are a Zaidi Shia group, rebel group, based in Yemen. They believe in a divine right to rule to Prophet Muhammad descendants, and that's where the leader of the movement and key leaders of the movement come from. They're also influenced by the Iranian Revolution, and in particular the concept of wilayat al-faqih, or the guardianship of the jurist, which means there is a supreme leader who has the ultimate political and religious authority. They seek to establish a theocracy in Yemen and beyond. They're also a member of Iran's Axis of Resistance, and probably now the jewel in the crown of the Axis of Resistance.
So this is a religious, ideologically driven group. I think you said at the symposium that they believed in the Mahdi, which is kind of a messianic figure that would come back towards the end of time, and many of their political ambitions are quite broad.
Yes, so their political ambitions are not only Yemen. They seek to take Mecca, and then their goal is to take Jerusalem, destroy Israel, and establish an Islamic government based in Jerusalem.
Wow.
That is global in nature. So they seek to expand beyond the Middle East eventually.
And some of their attacks in the Red Sea are being motivated, or at least by their own admission, due to some of the conflict in Gaza.
In part, yes, but the Houthis are really good at seizing opportunities to escalate. What the Houthis want in the region is a perpetual state of war. They need war because they need to build their jihadist army, and they need to create instability in order to push the U.S. out of the region, and then that they believe will help them achieve their objectives and long-term goal.
How many fighters are we talking about?
So the leader of the movement says they've recruited over 368,000 fighters. That might be an exaggerated number, but they probably have, experts say they have anywhere between 180 and 200,000 fighters.
Okay. And the conflict that's going on in Yemen, which borders the Red Sea, how long have would you characterize that as a civil war? And if so, they're fighting against the Yemeni government or the national government of Yemen for how long? And why have they been so difficult to defeat?
The Houthis have been fighting the government since 2004. They've been difficult to defeat not because they're popular or strong, but because their rivals have not been consistent. So when the Saudi-led coalition intervened in Yemen, the Saudi officials mentioned to American officials that it will be a 2-week air bombardment, and that will be it. The objective was to end the Houthis' coup and reinstate Yemeni government, control of the capital of Sana'a. The Houthis took the capital in September 2014. And that didn't happen. They underestimated the Houthis. And then there was no strategy in the war in the first place because, the Saudis thought they could defeat the Houthis in 2 weeks. And then after that, there was no consistency. So the Saudis did not provide enough support and consistent support for the Yemeni government forces to defeat the Houthis. But at the same time, the Saudis and the Emiratis had different objectives in Yemen. The Emiratis supported southern forces and focused on establish influence in Yemen coastline. The Saudis did not support Yemeni forces. The UAE-backed forces sort of clashed with the Yemeni government forces. So you have two regional allies of the Yemeni government sort of supporting rival forces that are supposed to be fighting the Houthis, but now they were sort of undermining each other, and that played into the hands of the Houthis. But the more important one is the peace process, because the peace process understandably focused on establishing truce and reaching a political settlement, the UN-led peace process. But what happened was the UN kept putting pressure on the Saudis and the Yemeni government to stop their offensive. At the same time, they did not have leverage on the Houthis. And so that ultimately led to the Stockholm Agreement in 2018. The Stockholm Agreement forced the Yemeni government forces to stop taking the Hodeida seaport from the Houthis and forced them to be on the offensive. So they've been on the defensive, since then. At the same time, the Houthis exploited that opportunity. They regrouped and they made significant military gains in the rest of Yemen, and now they're stronger militarily,
So they've also taken over a fair amount of the country at this point and are closer to the coast.
They control the north. They control Hodeida seaport. They continue to receive weapon shipment and assistance from Iran, and at the same time, there are no effective measures to sort of even mitigate that.
So let's talk about what kind of weapons they do have. Obviously, we're interested in attacks into the Red Sea itself. What are they attacking ships with, and where are they getting those weapons?
Yeah, good question, David. Again, thank you for having me here today. So what I saw there, during my time as the Maritime Operations Center Director, they obviously have a family of UAVs, long-range, one-way attack UAVs. The most widely used thus far to date is the CASO 4. Again, very long-range unmanned aerial vehicle.
But this is not like it's not like a drone that I would buy at Walmart or something. This is much larger, and much longer range.
Yeah, you're talking 15 to 20 foot wingspan, 1,000 kilometers. It can travel great distances, and it's got a pretty significant payload on the front.
Okay.
As we've seen throughout the recent attacks, and all the ones leading back to when this all started, when they impact a merchant vessel, the damage that those things can cause. And then the Houthis are not launching these one at a time; they're launching them in swarms.
Okay.
So we've seen that on several instances, the large-scale attacks that they are able to
swarms of
unmanned
how
aerial
many?
vehicles.
So 5 or
no,
50?
So I'll take you back to the night of October 19th when the first engagement from the USS Carney, when a large-scale attack from the Houthis to the north was in the 20s, in the 20s and 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and we've seen that several times. So family of unmanned aerial vehicles that they utilize. They also have a family of anti-ship cruise and ballistic missiles. We've seen that. And what we saw in the past, and still continue to see today, is that the Houthis will utilize the UAVs to kind of zero in their targeting, if you will. They're still indiscriminate targeting, but they would utilize the UAVs. If they weren't using them to attack, they would use them to refine their targeting. And then shortly behind the UAV would be a cruise missile or a ballistic missile. And I call them, ballistic missiles, but we have to understand what's happening in the theater. They're not flying a ballistic trajectory. They're not going exo-atmospheric. It's the speed associated with it, but the Houthis have depressed the trajectory, and these missiles are getting out to the battle space fairly quickly. To quantify that, if you look at where the ships are operating in the merchant traffic lane, if a ballistic missile is fired from the typical launching points that we've seen, the ships have anywhere from 15 to 20 seconds to react.
Wow. Evan, can you tell us about how, at least in the narrow part of the strait, what's the maritime distance here across that strait? Is it?
It's about 18.
About 18
miles,
nautical miles.
Yeah.
And how long has it been since these major attacks have been going on, at least in this most recent peace episode in the Red Sea?
Well, the first attack was November 19th, I believe. That was the Galaxy Leader.
Of this past year, of 2023.
So yes, 2023.
Okay.
And of the recent Houthi attacks. That was on the Galaxy Leader, and it was a helicopter that stormed the vessel.
Right, so there's some YouTube videos up that they've used for some propaganda purposes or whatever. So I think a lot of listeners may have seen pieces or parts of that, of them coming onto the ship or getting onto the ship in that regard.
Yep, I think they made music videos even. But the attacks have continued pretty steadily since then. There have been some lulls, but not very many. A total of 77. About half of them were hit. The rest were attempts.
So in terms of effectiveness, that's a pretty large number of attacks. All the hits at this point have been onto commercial vessels. We've not had any hits on U.S. warships.
Correct.
Partly because the defensive measures of those ships are either shooting these drones down in protection of other ships or in protection of their own battle space.
Correct. Yeah, it's funny. Evan talked about it. And the first attack, was October 19th, and I was, the Houthis attacking to the north, and Carney was successful in engaging those contacts. It was really a joint effort because the Air Force was successful as well. But that was October 19th, and as Evan talked about, November 19th was the first attack on a merchant vessel. And then you asked the question earlier, just to expand upon that a little bit. the rhetoric at the beginning was we were doing this in response to Israel invasion of Gaza, right?
Okay.
Therefore we're going to attack any merchant vessel with any Israeli affiliation. But what we've seen in the attacks they utilize that very loosely, and it is indiscriminate targeting now, which makes it very, very difficult. But yeah, there's been no successful attacks against U.S. Navy warships.
And how dangerous are these attacks to both? So how many ships have actually, so the number of ships have been hit?
39, I think.
Some ships have sunk?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
The third is, I believe, sinking as we speak, but 2 have sunk so
So
far.
it's tremendously recent events. I mean, even up to the last week or two, they've escalated attacks, I believe, and they continue to attack vessels throughout. Is that so? We're talking about things that may be happening while we're doing the broadcast.
That's right. That's right. And I think what we've seen too with other weapon system that I didn't get to in my early answer was they're starting to utilize their unmanned surface vessels, which have really changes the dynamic there. And I think the most recent merchant vessel that was hit and is sinking was hit by an unmanned surface vessel. So you think about an explosive laden unmanned surface boat that hits the ship at the waterline.
So it's almost like a drone. They've got like some sort of uncrewed vessel, and they're using it as kind of a manned or an unmanned torpedo on the surface of sorts, blows up at the ship line or something, and it has killed some seafarers as well.
Right.
Yeah, one seafarer died in the most recent attack, or the one with the USV. He was actually in the engine room and drowned. The remote-controlled drone boat, if you will, is actually controlled by another, well, they believe it's controlled by another skiff close by. So.
Okay. Let's go back to thinking about the U.S. warships here. So I know you mentioned the USS Carney. USS Carney is a Arleigh Burke destroyer. I know you've commanded one of these ships. Tell us a little bit about that. It's probably one of our most capable naval platforms.
Yeah.
And it's probably not the only ship. What else has the U.S. done from a Navy standpoint to try to protect shipping in the Gulf?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think we're doing this by with and through our partners as well. I think things got, I don't want to say better, because yes, the U.S. Navy has been highly successful in the operations that we've conducted in the Red Sea thus far. But when Operations Prosperity Guardian stood up and it became a partnered effort, I think that's when the game really changed because we all see the impacts to the global trade of what's happening in the Red Sea. And it's not just happening to the United States. But to your question, though, yes, our guided missile destroyers are the workhorse of the fleet. But we've had submarines in the area, we've had cruisers in the area, and of course the aircraft carrier Ike, and utilizing the aircraft from the Ike really changed the game as well, making us a more effective force. But the guided missile destroyers from Carney is just an example, but you got Mason, Gravely, Thomas Hudner, several have been out there doing great work. And to your point, we've been highly successful, and we're batting 1,000 right now. But when the men and women that wear the cloth of our nation and their lives are at risk because the Houthis are targeting U.S. warships, we have to be 1,000%.
So the Aegis system, which is usually located on one of the destroyers or maybe a cruiser, are we using that system?
Absolutely.
Or is that, and so that's part of this air cap from F-18s off the carrier deck. So everything's in play.
Absolutely.
How close do these attacks get? And there are multiple systems, or for defensive purposes, or no?
Yeah, there definitely are. So I mean, our warships are built with a degree of redundancy to make sure there just isn't one weapon system. Layered defense is something that we preach just to protect different ships, but also using different weapon systems to protect own ship. So yeah, the Aegis weapon system is playing a significant role. But when you tie that together with the aviation systems from the carrier, make a pretty formidable defense.
And the weapon of last resort?
Something called the close-in weapon system, CIWAG. We've seen that in action a couple times, unfortunately, but successful.
So it's like a very high-speed Gatling gun that's kind of trying to shred anything that's close to the ship.
That's exactly right. It's fully. You can put it in full autonomous mode, and it'll search, and when it sees a threat that it evaluates as a threat to the ship, it'll track it, and it'll engage it, and it won't stop shooting until it's no longer there.
But you don't really want to hear that going off.
We don't want to hear that going off.
Because that means that the attack has been successful enough to get close proximity proximity
That's right.
to the ship itself.
That's right, and that is the last resort if that weapon system doesn't hit. And I mean, there are soft kill options that you can try to persuade the weapon away from the ship. But if you hear that Gatling gun going off, that means that you're your last resort.
So they've used a variety of different weapons. Are they making these? If not, where are they getting these weapons? Are they manufacturing them in the country in some cases, or are they getting them by sea? Where are they getting these weapons?
So when the Houthis took the capital of Sana'a, they took control of military bases. And so they've inherited all the state weapons that were in the north. And that includes the weapons that were given to the Yemeni government by the U.S. to counter terrorism. But they also, most of the weapons come from Iran, and they come through Hodeida seaport. They come through land as well, via Oman, via smuggling routes. IRGC commanders on the ground with the Houthis have helped them develop weapon manufacturing, weapon assembling. So that includes
So I just want to clarify,
drones.
so the IRGC is the
Republic
Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from the
Guard, yeah.
Iranian group, and so they have advisors. So Iran basically has advisors helping the Houthis in this regard.
Yeah, they've had IRGC
Throughout
advisors for at
this,
least
okay.
for at least the past decade and before, Hezbollah as well.
Okay.
So Iran has provided the Houthis with weapon manufacturing capabilities. And so a lot of the weapons that come in, they're assembled in Yemen, including drones and missiles.
And are these, so they're not super expensive, probably not as expensive as some of the pieces and parts, some of the missiles that we're using to shoot down some of these larger drones.
Right, yeah, the average standard missile's around 2 million.
Okay. And why is it so difficult to interdict either the assembly parts that are coming in or the missiles themselves or other kind of weapons? Obviously, there's been some effort to interdict at least to the maritime routes that lead into the major port. I know you've talked about this with Commodore Fryer at the symposium some. Why is this such a difficult problem set in terms of trying to stop, allow aid in for humanitarian purposes, but to stop the smuggling of particularly weapons in this case that could be used in the Red Sea?
Yeah, good question, Dave. It's a challenge. It's something that we are solely, wholly focused on there in Fifth Fleet. And if you look at the track record, we have been successful in interdicting vessels. But obviously, things are continuing to get through. And why is that? Tyranny of distance is what I would chalk it up to. You're talking about an area from the Arabian Gulf to the Suez, about 3 million square miles, which is large. And for those, to put it in context, that's roughly the size of the United States, right? So if you take something roughly the size of the United States, and on any given day, you're trying to police that area with 4 or 5, we'll call it even 10 ships, right? 10 ships that can, on top speed, do 30 knots, which is 30, 35 miles an hour, right? So you liken that with 10 cop cars that can do 30, 45 miles an hour trying to police the entire United States. And oh, by the way, the enemy that's carrying the bad stuff is driving the same color car, the same type of car as everybody else. So what I mean by that is if you look at the fishing vessels in that area, they're called dhows. And that is a very, very common type of fishing vessel. And literally hundreds, if not thousands of these underway every single day. Well, that's what we're
So those are, so there's a ton of those out on the
Exactly.
water. You don't know which ones are being used for smuggling,
Exactly.
which ones are actually fishing.
Exactly.
And it's very difficult, even from an intelligence standpoint, to even know what's on each one of these. You don't have time to board every single one of them.
That's right.
You're operating a huge expanse
That's
of
right.
water.
That's right. Now, the intel community has been very, very successful and very helpful in us and the ones that we were successful in interdicting. But yeah, it's just the large number. And again, being out there and the intel community goes, hey, it's on a dhow.
It's on a fishing vessel.
That's exactly
somewhere.
right. That's exactly right.
Somewhere in this near vicinity.
That's
There's
right. That's
something
right.
that's coming on one of these.
That's right,
400
and they do the
vessels,
best to
so-
try to narrow it down as best as they can. And most of the time, they're very, very good. They're all the time they're really good at it, but most of the time they're really successful. And other times, it gets much, much harder once the vessel, gets underway and gets into the mix with all the other dhows, trying to pick it out from the one they told us was the bad one. And then you just look at the distance that we're trying to cover, the amount of cop cars, if you will, that we would need to cover that entire area is just, enormous. So that's why you see a lot of efforts now, championed by Admiral Cooper and the team out there, and with unmanned technology, trying to cover that water space and increase our maritime domain awareness.
And I think, Nadwa, some of your colleagues were talking about the fact that once upon a time, there was an inspection regime that was set up under UN mandate, so that some, or maybe all of the ships, are supposed to go somewhere like Djibouti, get inspected before they arrive at the port in Yemen, but that's not always happening.
So there was two inspection mechanisms. One is still in effect. So the Saudis had their own inspection mechanism. And it was relatively effective, but the Saudis, since April 2022, when the Saudis started direct negotiations with the Houthis, the Saudis dismantled their inspection mechanism. There's also the UN inspection mechanism on them. The problem with the UN inspection mechanism is that ships have to report to the UN inspection mechanism before they enter Hodeidah seaport, and a lot of ships don't report. So I'll just give you an example. Since last November, according to Yemen government forces, 15 Iranian ships arrived in Hodeidah seaport coming from Bandar Abbas seaport in Iran, and those were not inspected. Wow. They did not report to UNVEM mechanism.
So maybe, Evan, you could give us a little bit, I know you're in this business, flagging ships. So one of the reasons we've invited you is because the Republic of the Marshall Islands flags a tremendous amount of ships that we use and other people use around the world. How does that work? I mean, so other countries have somebody flag this ship. And so even though it's flagged by Republic of Marshall Islands or some other entity, you really don't know still. You're supposed to know what the cargo manifest says or whatever, but there are laws about what can be done to ships on international waters. Help explain that to our audience just a little bit.
Sure. So the flag state really, the laws of the flag state apply to that ship. What's good about a politically neutral flag, that's most of the large flags are more politically neutral, is you won't get targeted, but we've got some pretty smart adversaries now that can look at other parts of the ship. Ships are multinational, and that's an understatement. I mean, they are...
Because of the crews, and because of the ownership, because of the flag.
The crews, the ownership, management, insurers, you name it, and they're all probably different nationalities. So they have been able to target or figure out, research the owners or the cargo owners. There's vessel owner and cargo owner. If that is a U.S. link or Israeli link, then it's fair game.
But of course, we're looking at intelligence, trying to figure out, in some cases we may know, well, these ships are coming from Iran, and so we want to be careful about what they might be carrying. In other cases, they're going to bypass that system somehow, and they're on some fishing boat that we have no idea where they came from, who's got flagged. They've relocated the target on multiple ships. So this is a very, very, very complicated and complex system. How crowded is the maritime traffic in the Red Sea?
Well, it's down 60% since the Houthi started.
It's less, okay.
Yeah, so it's definitely less. Yeah, I don't know the exact amount, exact amount of traffic, but...
How much of the world's goods float through the Red Sea in terms of containerized traffic? So they transit probably in both directions. Suez leads into the Mediterranean, but there's a northern opening and southern opening past the Strait. But how much and what type of traffic goes through these narrow seas and into the Red Sea and beyond?
Yeah, sure. So about 12 to 15% of total world trade goes through.
Total world trade and global maritime trade.
Yes, total maritime trade goes through the Red Sea, from Suez down to Bab el-Mandeb.
And to put that in perspective, 90% of the world's goods, or somewhere between 70 and 90% of all the world's goods, are transported by ship.
Yep.
Okay, so 10 to 12% of that entire global effort is transiting through the Red Sea in this narrow strait.
Correct, but that's made up of about 30% of container transits or traffic. 8% of LNG, I think like 8% of grain, and I think 12% of oil.
So bulk commodities,
Yeah.
containerized vessels, mostly, some energy transports probably, LNG, maybe oil as well.
Yeah, and LNG actually stopped completely going through there. We haven't had an LNG ship go through since I believe January of this year, but the first one had a successful transit last week. So
Is that because LNG is very explosive in terms of if it does get hit? I mean, there have been accidents, very rare, but
yeah, a lot of
that's a
people.
big problem.
Yeah.
A lot of people think it's very volatile, and it is, but it's so cold, LNG, that the jury's out on that. Really, it could be bad, could be nothing.
And have any tankers been hit in terms of like oil spills or from an environmental standpoint here in the Red
Yes.
Sea? And
Definitely. We have Marlin Luanda, which is under the Marshall Islands flag, UK-owned vessel. Was hit by a ballistic missile, and it was carrying naphtha, which is very volatile, and burned for about a day. But they fought the fire for a day, didn't abandon ship, which
Remarkable.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
so this could have severe economic, not just economic, but environmental
No, without question.
Could.
Yeah,
problems. That's
the
as
U.S.
well.
Navy helped responded to that by giving them firefighting foam. But going back to the point about indiscrimination, I think that's what also is causing issues with the flow, because the Houthis several times have come out and specifically called out what vessel they wanted to attack, right? And they'll
So
come out.
who are they targeting? I mean, at least they say they're targeting these sets, and yet it looks like some of their attacks are indiscriminate.
Very much
And
so.
so there's something moving,
Yeah.
and we're going to shoot at it.
Right.
But who are they mainly targeting?
Well, for the Houthis,
Besides U.S. warships.
well, I think for the Houthis, these attacks are about projecting power. They want to project themselves as a regional power, an international power in the region, and that's why a lot of these attacks are not necessarily targeted towards specific. They say it's targeted towards Israel-linked ships, but I think
Oftentimes it's not, yeah.
it's a lot of
And
times
that
it's not.
Israeli link could be anything. Could be the owner, could be a particular portion of the cargo, could be crew members, could be supporters to Israel like the United States, any United States flag vessel or anything connected to that. They would certainly target if they knew that that's what it was.
I think, again, the more they hit, the more they make the headlines, and that's what they want.
And they're constantly changing the goalpost. I mean, they're moving the goalpost. There used to be just Israelis, then it was Israelis, Americans, and Brits.
That's right.
And now it's like sister ships of ships that are going through the Red Sea that are linked to Israel or have called in Israel. So they're running out of targets and they're expanding their.
That's right.
What have been the impacts to containerized traffic in the Red Sea? I mean, we talked about the percentage of global traffic, but how much has this slowed? You said that 60% of the overall traffic has lessened because probably some ship owners are making calculated risk decisions about maybe taking a longer route around Africa or somewhere else.
Yeah, so they're rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope, which
is longer, costs more economically to the consumer or to the ship owner.
sure, it's a lot more fuel oil, a lot more shipping costs, but really the cost to the consumer is flattened out. It spiked in the beginning. Shipping is extremely resilient. We can get around anything basically, if possible.
I think I read, though, that there was container spot rates, which is, I guess, a cost of containerized process, has been rising, continues to rise, and is continuing to expect to rise. And I think that a couple of you told me that the commerce going through the Suez has been greatly affected, at least for Egypt and those mechanisms to get back and forth through the Suez.
Yeah, so the Suez, I believe, is down 50%. So that's a lot of money that Egypt has lost.
So, what are So if they continue this or if they escalate it, what are the long-term implications to global shipping, do you think? Could be that even fewer ships go, Suez goes down even farther. I mean, I remember when the container ship got stuck, and it seemed like there was all sorts of growing economic reverberations, kind of second and third order effects about so-and-so couldn't get this and stores were out of this. Could you see those type of effects over time, or do you think that we'll just continue to utilize Joe and his best friends to hopefully keep this at bay and kind of manage it? What are the long-term implications? What are the worst possible long-term implications here for the global environment?
Well, I think, in my opinion, the worst possible outcome could be if they succeed in shutting down the route. And this is not economic, this is more, I wouldn't want anyone to emulate them. If they succeed here, you know, others will try to do the same thing in other choke points. So they can't succeed. I think that's but no, we don't want the Navy to have to protect shipping forever.
It may not be really a long-term solution. I mean,
Yeah.
it is expensive. I think some of the ships there then are probably on high alert on almost a constant basis while they're in those waters, probably because they're going back and forth, escorting, you know, or looking for attacks. So, and they're being attacked themselves. And so there's a cost to deployment costs. I mean, we talk about the impact onto sailors and maintenance to the fleet. We have to put those ships into dry dock to reset them periodically, and we're a global Navy.
That's right.
How long can we sustain, you know, is this really a long-term prospect to try to manage this day to day? For how long?
No, I don't think we want this to be long term, and I'll default to Nadwa. I thought her comment earlier was profound. Like, if the Houthis' goal is to use this to increase their stature on the global stage, when or why would they ever stop, right? So if that is the prospects, then we definitely have to reevaluate that. Because, I mean, so the point being, you know, when the war finally stops in Gaza and Israel, you know, withdraws, will the Houthis stop? You know, if that's their stated goal. But if not, if they're continuing to do this because they want to increase their stature on the global stage, then we have a bigger problem. Yeah, this is challenging our force readiness, but the U.S. Navy, you know, been wholly impressed by my brothers and sisters out there on the waterfront and just how successful we've been. And it's just a testament to the investments that we've made over the last decade or so, the training and the recruitment and how we are preparing our forces before they go on deployment through exercises and training. So yes, we can keep this up, but do we want to keep this up for longer? I mean, our job is to, you know, ensure the free flow of commerce, and we're not going to cede that battle space. We're not going to let them shut down that strait.
And
but
we've seen, I mean, this is the first time that the Navy has had extensive combat type of operations. I mean, we're not fighting another Navy, but it's a significant non-state actor that is attacking U.S. warships.
Yeah, you'd have to go back to World War II to find the last time that we've been at this pace of operations with somebody shooting at us and us actively shooting down those weapons.
And it's a very complicated system. I mean, I've been out on an aircraft carrier. The system itself and all it's designed to do is an amazing set of systems. And I'm sure that's true of even operating in that kind of defensive and offensive environment bubble that is being enacted on a daily, hourly basis.
That's right. That's right.
Let's talk maybe the three of you for a minute about what's really at stake here. And Nadwa, I'll turn back to you for a minute. So it's not just about the amount of ships that go through. What else is really at stake if we can't manage this, or if we have to continue to manage it at the pace that we're doing now, or they get more weapons and continue to escalate this type of attack in the Red Sea? What's really at stake when we come down to think about it?
I mean, I think, you know, the worst case scenario is if the Houthis manage to take Yemen, and they're gearing up for escalation within Yemen right now. They have been for the past 2 years at least. The Houthis' objective, and that they share with Iran and proxies, is to evict the U.S. from the region. And this is a war of attrition. They're not going to stop. I don't think they will stop if the Gaza war ends, because now and for the past 20 years, the Houthis say they're at war with America and Israel. I mean, their logo is death to America, death to Israel. And so that's what's at stake, is that the U.S. is forced out of the region now. There is,
so at the symposium, we had Dr. Till there, and I think he made the point that perhaps, because you've mentioned Iran and what their ambitions are, the United States and the allies of the United States have constructed what we usually refer to as the international rules-based order, which includes free flow of global commerce on the high seas. Mm-hmm. And that trade is important to the whole functioning of the global system. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, as a set, are normally considered revisionist powers. They would like to see some change to that global order, to that global system. Is this really an attack on the system itself?
Absolutely, yes. That's one of Iran and the Houthis' goal, is to change the world order eventually, and in time, establish their own Islamic government in the region.
How much leverage does Iran have over the Houthis?
So the Houthis are not Iran puppets, and that's very important to understand, because diplomats have been going to Iran to try to pressure the Houthis, but Iran has empowered the Houthis enough to act on their own. And the Houthis have ambition even beyond being part of Axis of Resistance. They want to see themselves as the leaders of the Axis of Resistance. And so they need to be treated as such.
So then let's talk about short, long-term desired outcomes. So obviously the first one is that we desire that the Houthis stop firing missiles onto ships in the Red Sea. So if we could either prevent that by interdicting the supply chain, or attacking sites, launch sites, or move them farther back from the coast, perhaps, those would be short-term immediate
goals.
objectives. Is certainly what we're trying to do now, right?
I would agree with that, yeah. Significantly reduce, or if not completely stop, the attacks that are going on right now. I think, there's been I wouldn't say recent shift, but, this all started out, how do we deter the Houthis from doing what they're doing? We quickly realized that was not the immediate goal. The goal was to assure shipping and our partners that they could freely flow through that strait.
So you use the word deterrence.
Yeah.
Can the Houthis be deterred because they have this religious ideology, which I think to them then would believe that they're doing God's work, and therefore whether they get killed or not, they don't want to stop that. So normally deterrence is with a non-religious, usually, actor that is going to change their behavior because we're adding pressure. And that may not be possible in this case.
I think we need to be strategic. We've never been strategic. On this case and other case, but I'll speak to this case. The U.S. response to the Houthis have been reactionary, short-term. Iran and the Houthis are long-term. So Iran has seen its investment in the Houthis, 40 years of investment in the Houthis, materialize in the Red Sea attacks. And
the power of the Houthis is growing, really, because they're taking over
more
of the country.
But it didn't happen overnight.
Right.
It took a long time to build their capabilities, but it took consistency as well. The U.S. forced the U.S. and the UN forced the Yemeni government and the Saudi-led coalition to stop the taking Hulida seaport from the Houthis, to abort taking the port from the Houthis. And back then, a lot of Yemenis, including myself, were warning that that was a big mistake and that will lead the Houthis to threaten international shipping and regional security, and that's exactly what happened 5 years later. And so I think we need to be more strategic. The Houthis respect power, and we've been doing diplomacy for 10 years We've exhausted diplomacy. I'm not saying diplomacy is not a good option. It should continue to be the first option. But at the same time, the Houthis continue to escalate. So
and militarily, so just to be clear, the Saudis have been
the Saudis
with
have,
the Yemenis in a war against the Houthis. They've been attacked. There's been many missile strikes, air strikes onto Houthi forces, which has also not stopped them from their political ambitions or their growing power. Really.
Yeah, but the Saudis themselves came under a lot of attacks by the Houthis. The Houthis missiles and drones have over 800 missiles and drones inside Saudi attack infrastructure, oil infrastructure, including Aramco, and that sort of forced the Saudis to unofficially end their military intervention in Yemen. Since April 2022, the Saudis have been out of Yemen militarily. And they've been negotiating a deal with the Houthis to extricate themselves from Yemen and kind of focus on their domestic economic goal, which is Vision 2030. At the same time, the Houthis feel emboldened. And the Houthis have learned the skill of using force, violence, to sort of extract concessions. They managed to do that with the UN, they managed to do that with the Saudis and the Emiratis, and now they're trying to do that also with the US and the international community.
It seems to me that this reminds me a little bit about Fehrenbach wrote this book, about the Korean War. Very famous passages from that book was that you can fly over a piece of territory and bomb it forever, but unless you put force on the ground, you can't change it politically.
Yeah.
And of course, what you're describing is the fact that what really needs to happen over time is that the political situation in Yemen has to change, and if it doesn't, then the Houthis' power is liable to continue to grow vis-a-vis the government, and then these attacks in the Red Sea and that are affecting all of us and allies and partners in the maritime industry will continue. The problem, I think, for the United States and others is that we have had bad experiences with force intervention, putting force on the ground, and the difficulties that ensue from that. And so we probably aren't really, wouldn't be very excited about putting U.S. troops or forces into Yemen itself. And yet we need a local partner, which is probably the national Yemenis government. Without that, I mean, what do we have?
Yeah, we would not want U.S. boots on the ground. Let me just state that. I would not want that. I think it would be counterproductive. But we do
and
have
politically infeasible, I think.
Yes, yes.
I agree.
And it will only reinforce the Houthis' narrative that the U.S. has been fighting them for decades, fighting Yemen. So we do have a Yemeni government in place. It's not perfect. It's not strong, but there are Yemeni forces on the ground. And with enough support and weapons, they could weaken the Houthis militarily. I think what we need is we need the Houthis to get to a point where they feel that violence and military escalation is not their best alternative. And that's not the case right now.
So diplomatically, why not convene? I mean, we talked a little bit about this in one of the working groups that we had at Symposium. Why not convene a summit with many of the local regional players and determine a way forward that's more strategic, that would support a political outcome, that would threaten what is important to the Houthis. If you don't have leverage and they're interested in territory and in power, it seems to me that we're kind of putting a Band-Aid on this. It's an exquisite Band-Aid, and we've been very successful at it in these localized time pockets. But for us to do this forever, or if those attacks, heaven forbid, were to sink a U.S. warship, then this whole game will change on a massive scale.
That would definitely change things, in a very unfortunate direction.
And that would help, I think, informationally as a narrative as well, that perhaps other countries, there are countries that could be involved in, and local forces have done some advisory work. I know UAE has done some advisory work in Yemen. Saudi has obviously been involved because they have a problematic border with Yemen, and there's a lot of Yemenis. And so I'm just thinking about other kinds of outcomes that are policy recommendations that we could think about? So, I mean, diplomatically, that's one. Are there other things that we could do, either militarily or economically? What could be done economically in the country to try to leverage against the Houthis?
Well, I think this, the Saudis are very important to this because the Saudis will always be involved in Yemen. That's just a reality, whether we like it or not. And so,
because they have that border.
Because they have that border, we share a lot with the Saudis. The U.S. has not been consistent with the Saudis. For the first 8 years of the war, the U.S. has been pressuring the Saudis to sort of end their military intervention in Yemen, even though they were selling weapons to the Saudis, but they were backing a UN peace process that sort of put pressure on the Saudis to end their military intervention, and that led to the Stockholm Agreement in 2018, and that benefited the Houthis. And now the U.S. is kind of frustrated why the Saudis are trying to make peace with the Houthis and extricate themselves from Yemen. I think the U.S. and the Saudis need to be on the same page. In Yemen right now, it's not the case. Mm-hmm. And I think the U.S. need to reassure the Saudis. Because since the Iran deal, the Saudis have been feeling that the U.S. is not a reliable partner. Diplomacy is good, but diplomacy without teeth is not enough. Mm-hmm. So, especially with actors like the Houthis who absolutely refuse to de-escalate, who reject. They don't recognize the Yemeni government altogether.
But in order for some of the things that you're thinking about, and by the way, I thought some of your comments in one of our workshops about the banks, the telecommunications, particularly from the north, could be moved maybe to the south. But all of that, and whether or not, we see Ukraine, we see this effort to arm Ukraine, even though we're not putting people in. The peace process, though, restricts us really from arming the Yemenis government against the Houthis. Is that true?
Yeah, the Article 2016, the UN Resolution 2216 prevents arming the Yemen government, and I think that should change. Because the Houthis are being armed every day. Right. And so
would we have to end the peace process in order to change the policy?
I wouldn't say end the peace process. I mean, the peace process has been in a sort of de facto pause since at least 2016, definitely since 2018. And to me, it's dead, but I think it should always be there. But at the same time, we need to be realistic and prepare. We need to work for peace, but we need to prepare for escalation. Mm-hmm. So because the Houthis are.
But there's definitely policy issues that would have to be confronted in order for us to get a regional change. I want to turn to Evan and Captain Baggett for a minute too. So there was another comment and a dialogue that came up in one of the workshops that we had at Symposium yesterday, that militarily, we could possibly do convoy operations instead of the type of operations. I mean, we've got a couple of ships there on any given day running up and down, trying to do too much in some ways, sometimes difficult, if not control, coordination with the ships that are supposed to be going with them. And if something happens, it's not quite like convoy operations where you would have a specific time, everybody would kind of be under the command of a convoy leader. I mean, we saw that in the Battle of the Atlantic. We've seen successful convoy operations. They are costly as well. I think we'd need an international maritime force to help with that. What do the two of you think in terms of assuring our allies or to protect shipping? Would that be something that we should think about developing? I mean, that's a complicated military operation, but Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's largely underway now. Maybe not full-blown convoy operations, but a couple months ago we shifted to exactly what you're just talking about, and it's establishing a protective umbrella, if you will, warship in front, 2 to 3 merchant vessels in the middle, and a warship behind them, right? So now the warships are mutually supportive of one another.
You have kind of a bubble that you can kind of move everybody through more safely.
Exactly.
You could do it at certain times. Do they have difficulty operating at night, perhaps, maybe, with some of their technology?
coordination
to-
piece is
Okay.
is a challenge, as you highlighted,
Right.
but things that the team out there continues to work through on a daily basis. But that is one way to get after this militarily and continue to assure, to your point, shift from deterrence to assuring our allies and partners that it's safe to operate.
Now, we had Commodore Fryer there that I know you know. He was the deputy commander
Yeah.
for Admiral Cooper at NAVCENT. He talked about, I think he was in command of the Combined Maritime Force. I think he said that's the largest international maritime force. Could we use more international warships to help with this kind of effort and coordinate that as a larger process to prevent these type of attacks over time?
Well, my concern is really capacity. I mean, we don't have enough ships to take all the traffic through.
Yeah.
So this is about the volume of shipping as
Right.
well. Okay.
Yeah, and especially if they go back to trading through the Red Sea. So it's
Or the ships could choose. I'm not going to leave. I'll wait until convoy effort is available, or I'm going to take my chances without the convoy, and I'm going to continue to push through with these other ships up here and hope that I don't get targeted.
yeah, we could do that. I mean, from what I've heard from both navies, EU NAVFOR and the U.S. and UK, they're referring to it as a accompaniment or
Yeah.
loose accompaniment.
Yeah.
I guess that just means a little further away from than actually escorting. Convoys are a little different. I don't believe we've done too many of them
No,
yet. So
full-blown convoys.
Well, we
to-
haven't done them since one of the recent wars.
Right,
I mean,
right.
you know, it's been a while since we've done it. Although navies typically don't like to do it because it requires a lot of naval presence
Yeah.
to do it,
Yeah.
which would probably mean a maritime task force of an international flavor.
Yeah, well, to your point, just the volume of shipping makes it very challenging to do, which is what, I think, again, Operation Prosperity Guardian and the success of that is bringing in the other countries and other nations into the fight. I think, by the time I left, it was in the mid-20s of nations that had signed on to that to provide either ships or planners or intel or something in support of the operations going on there, and maybe getting ourselves to the point, if we get enough shipping in the area, to do sort of the zone defense, if you will, right? Enough ships along the area so a ship could safely pass through.
So, Evan, just the last couple of comments, and we'll close this out in a minute. But so ships come into the Red Sea. Who do they coordinate with? I mean, do they, they're not talking to Joe's warship necessarily. They just arrive, and I assume there's some tracking of maritime shipping of who's coming in. Who do they coordinate with if they want protection or assistance? How does that work?
So they should be coordinated with their flag, but it's actually very difficult right now because there is not a one single reporting center or reporting.
So you don't go to the front desk and say, can you
first
help
court,
me
that's
with
right.
this problem?
That's right.
There's no 911. There are multiple 911s. There's the IMB, all the navies, all the different navies, and the flag state. So they've got to report to UKMTO, MSC HOA, NAVCENT, or
Yep.
NCAGs,
Yep.
the flag, IMB. So there's way too many right now for a master to. And talk about when he gets attacked, he's got 5 or 6 numbers to call.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense right now.
Yeah.
So we've got to simplify that.
Yeah, the
for-
command and control is challenging out there, which is why we stood up Combined Task Force 153 to help get after that. But to your point, there's still the number, the amount of people that they have to report to.
Well, this is a fascinating topic, and like I said, it's probably, you talk about currency. I mean, this is happening while we're talking about it, and it's a very difficult problem. There's a tremendous number of parameters that are complicating all of the situation, from military to diplomatic to the strategic orientation to the industry aspects. I appreciate you coming and talking with us. Why don't we go around the room for our last comments, and I'll start with Joe, and then we'll move to Nadwa and end with Evan.
No.
So, Joe, any last thoughts or comments to our audience about this?
No, Dan, I just want to say thank you again for inviting me here and being part of this. I think this is, the symposium that you put on for the last 2 days, with the workshops and the minds here at this table today is how we're going to get after this, is how we're going to solve this. I call it a complex problem. This has gone beyond complicated. This is a complex problem. This is a wicked problem. That's right, but it takes these minds from academia, from industry, from military, from policy to figure out how we're going to get after this. It's going to take every element of the dime in order for us to solve this problem. But again, it's just been an honor and a really professionally rewarding for me to be a part of this. I thank you.
Well, I think it's great that you've just come back from doing this exact work, and you are now commanding the school that is training our surface warfare officers, and I think that couldn't be better suited. So,
thank you.
Nadwa.
Yeah. Thank you for having me again. I think the Houthis are a long-term threat to Yemen, to the region, to U.S. interests in the region, and to the world order. And I think it's time to stop dealing with the Houthis, by wishful thinking. We need to be realistic. We need to stop reacting to what the Houthis are doing. We need to be a little more proactive, and we need to be strategic. Without that, things could go wrong and in no time, and we might, if the Houthis take Yemen, it will be too little, too late to do anything about that threat. And so I'm asking people to be strategic.
Evan, last thoughts.
Well, first, I just on behalf of the industry, I want to say we're extremely grateful for what the Navies are doing to protect us. We don't want this to be long term. We are trying to think of ways to protect ourselves. It's very difficult in this situation, but we love working with the Navy, and that's a recent thing. Really collaborating industry and Navy. It's not something we've done in the past, and we don't know too much about each other. So the fact that we're getting together now and learning is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this topic couldn't be more timely, and having military, scholarly, and industry experts at the symposium and here today is tremendously informative, and we very much appreciate you joining us for this special edition of the Trident, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. If you were unable to attend our recent symposium exploring maritime strategies, the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, this has been an excellent, informative discussion with these experts on one of the most impactful situations on the seas today. And Nadwa, Evan, and Captain Baggett, I would truly appreciate your expertise and your insights on this extraordinarily important topic. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Trident, a podcast on irregular warfare. Opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the U.S. Naval War College. Please find us at www.usnwc.edu/CIWAG and consider subscribing to our bi-weekly newsletter, The Patrol, or listen to further episodes of The Trident. Until next time.